Yay, Media Group. You've probably seen the headlines that on average, we have the equivalent of 5 bottle caps worth of plastics just hanging out in our brain. We're joined today by a researcher who's an expert in all things plastic. She's going to help us separate fact from hype. And here's sort of a way to think about it. When it comes to nutrition, we're often encouraging you to rethink, what are we eating, drinking, looking at those nutrition labels, what's really in it, and what might be a better alternative. And gradually, over time, starting to make these small changes that can really move the needle in our wellness. And we'll be talking about how to use the same approach to gradually start to reduce our exposure to plastics starting right now. A quick note before we dive into today's podcast. If you like what you hear, I would love for you to subscribe to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, wherever you download your podcast. It would also be incredible if you take a minute to rate and review this podcast. Those things do matter and they really help us. I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. Welcome to this week's episode of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. If you've listened to our podcast before, you know that we love digging into the science behind the headlines, but also without being fearmongers. And there's a recent headline, y'all, that is making a really big splash. And it's that researchers have found plastics in our brain, plastics that amount to about the weight of 5 plastic bottle caps that's inside of our brains. And so tiny fragments from old plastic waste are turning up in brains that researchers are finding. They're finding that it's in our bloodstream. It's even in the placentas of newborns. And it might sound a little wacky. It sounds like it's something that's, a conspiracy theory or something that's a sci-fi movie, but it's real research that's published just this year. So how worried should we be really? What dose, what level of plastics inside of our body crosses the line from, to, okay, well, that's a significant health risk that I really need to be concerned about. And most importantly, what can we start doing now? What can we start doing today that will make the biggest shift, move the needle the most in our own plastic exposure without completely flipping our lives upside down? So to help us cut through the noise, I've invited back one of my favorite science communicators, Dr. Sherri Sam Mason. She holds a doctorate in chemistry from the University of Montana, and she's a leading researcher in freshwater plastic pollution. Sam's work was among the very first to document microplastics in the Great Lakes, and her research really laid the groundwork for something that's called the U.S. Microbead-Free Waters Act back in 2015. She's been featured everywhere from New York Times to NPR's All Things Considered. She's been on this podcast with us before back in 2021, so I'm excited to have her back. And her official title is Director of Project Neptune at Gannon University. So with that, welcome, Sam. I'm excited to have you back.
Thank you so much for having me back. It's great to be here.
It's a mouthful. So Project Neptune. And you said, you know what, let's just get all that out and then let's talk about what is Project Neptune that you're
Yeah, so Project Neptune is a water quality and economic revitalization initiative of Gannon University in Erie, Pennsylvania. So we're looking at the water and through that hoping to make our world, our community a better place, basically.
How did you get into the world of plastics research?
Yeah, so I first heard about plastic pollution when I was kind of finishing my PhD. And this was right when the quote unquote discovery of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Being just kind of an environmental chemistry nerd, I kind of keep my fingers on all kind of environmental issues. And so it was one that I kind of monitored as an oceans issue. And then I had an opportunity to board a tall ship, actually based here in Erie, Pennsylvania. It's the U.S. Berg Niagara, and teach an environmental science course aboard this vessel in the Great Lakes. And while I was out in the Great Lakes, because the Great Lakes, people who don't live here don't maybe appreciate, they're referred to as inland seas because they're just so big and so vast. And so we were out, you couldn't even see land. And I was reminded about everything I'd seen, heard, and read about plastic pollution in the world's oceans. And I was like, well, what about freshwater? And this is the largest freshwater ecosystem in the entire planet. And people need fresh water for life, right? We're both drinking water out of our glass containers. And so it got me thinking, and oddly, nobody had really looked in freshwater at that point in time. And so I changed my research focus. I was an atmospheric chemist at the time, and changed to plastic pollution and freshwater systems. And the rest, as they say, is history. 15 years later, here we are.
I was going to ask about how long ago it was. So around 2010.
It was 2011 when I was out on the vessel. So almost 15 years. Yeah.
And was there starting to be more of the conversation around it? But I would imagine limited as far as what the mainstream awareness was as far as plastic pollution.
It was really discussed as a oceans issue. And I think as a consequence, people really kind of thought, oh, it's those shipping containers falling off the vessels. That's what's causing this. It's not me. It's not the fact that I use plastic in my life in a multitude of ways, right? I think people felt very disconnected. Many people, and here in the United States, I think many people felt pretty disconnected from this as an issue. And so I think with us bringing it into freshwater, and then from there, it went into what's in our tap water, what's in bottled water, what's in beer and sea salts and seafood. And, as you start to bring it more relevant to the things that people do and consume every day, it becomes more real to them. And I think they feel more connected to this as an issue. And so all of these things were kind of happening in tandem: the science, the public awareness, the technology to be looking at smaller pieces of plastic as well.
That's a really good point, because when we think of there's plastics in the ocean, it does feel very far away. But when you talk about, well, what are the plastics in the beer that somebody's drinking, like that seems like something that shouldn't make sense, that shouldn't happen. When you joined me last time, we talked about different types of plastics and microplastics, nanoplastics. There's a lot of terminology that's out there now as we're kind of reading some of the stories behind the headlines. So walk us through you mentioned too, that our technology has gotten better at detecting smaller plastics. So share us with that, the different types, the different sizes. How do we find how much is in these different types of products?
Well, it's a big question. Well, we start with something big, right? Some big plastic item, right? And these would be called macroplastics. So they're big. And
plastic that you can see. So
plastic that you can see.
Like if you're like holding your plastic pen, your anything, like
your bags, your bottles, your straws, your takeout containers, your refrigerator, your car, right? Like these are all made out of plastic. So you have these big plastic items. As they're out in the environment, if they get lost or you get in a car accident, right, they break into smaller and smaller pieces through mechanical abrasion. So that really is something that separates or makes plastics different from other materials, is they don't biodegrade. It's largely a mechanical process. So they break into ever smaller pieces. There's very few microorganisms that can use plastic as a food source. And so it does not readily biodegrade. It's mostly a mechanical process. And so it breaks into these ever smaller pieces. A microplastic would be a piece of plastic that is between 1 micron and 5 millimeters in size. It's a huge size range. So 5 millimeters would be like the pencil at the end of the eraser at the end of your pencil, or like a fingernail.
So still pretty big. We could see that microplastic.
Yeah, you can see that. Exactly. Yeah. And then a human hair on average the width of a human hair is about 100 microns. So still microplastic. And then, so if you take 1/100th the width of a human hair, that would be the smallest microplastic. And you're definitely down at the size range. You're not going to see it. And once you get below 1 micron, then we're in the nanoplastics range. So nanoplastic would be a piece of plastic that is between 100 nanometers and 1 micron in size, which is, it's kind of unbelievable. You can't really kind of put that into terms. Once you get below 100 nanometers, then you're in the molecular size range. So we're talking, when you're talking nanoplastics, it's like the size of a virus, a piece of plastic that's like the size of a virus.
So say that it's 1/100th of a strand of hair. It's super tiny, and that's even kind of the biggest of these nanoplastics. So technology's gotten better, though, that we're able to identify these more or test for these more than we used to be.
Yeah. So it was only January of last year, so January of 2024, that the first kind of study came out looking at nanoplastics within bottled water. And what really made that study interesting, especially interesting, was that it was able to not only detect that there was a nanoparticle there, but that it was plastic and the type of plastic it was. Was it polyethylene terephthalate? Was it, polyethylene? Was it polypropylene? So it could actually tell you the type of plastic. And so that was only a year and a half ago that we were able to really detect nanoplastics. And so over, the 15-ish years that I've been doing this, we've been able to go, from talking about big plastics to looking at microplastics and identifying those in different media, to now we're able to look at nanoplastics.
Which has to be really exciting for you to...
It's endlessly fascinating, but it's also disturbing, because the smaller we go, the more we realize that they're just everywhere, right? So like our bottled water study, we were at the time, we did this, it was 2018. We were able to only go down to about 100 microns. So microplastic size range, found an average of 325 pieces per liter of bottled water. The study that came out last year found an average of 240,000 nanoplastics
per liter of water.
Per liter of bottled water. So that's almost a 1,000-fold increase, because we're able to look at smaller particles.
And this is going to get in the weeds a little bit, but when we're looking at all these different types of plastics that are identified in bottled water, it's not from only the plastic that the container is in, that bottled water is in. It's from all types.
It's mostly from the packaging of the water. Okay. So we looked at tap water and we found an average of like 5 pieces of microplastic.
Okay.
So, and 325, if you're, comparing apples to apples, 325 in that same size range in bottled water. So pretty significant. That's 100-fold increase, looking from tap to bottled water. And the article that came out a year ago also kind of confirmed what we said in ours, and there's been other studies too. When you package something in plastic, it has a lot of plastic in it. And it's because it's weird. We don't think of plastics this way, but plastics are very much kind of like our skin, and our skin is constantly shedding skin cells, or plastics are constantly shedding microplastics. And so anything, that takeout container you're getting your Chinese food in, right? That black boat with the clear lid that we've all seen, that is, the second you put food in there, there's microplastics added to that food, because it's just shedding off of the packaging.
It's something we absolutely don't think about. Especially someone may say, they're staunchly avoiding styrofoam, or I'm going to only use certain types of plastics, or I'm not going to heat in plastic. But some of these things, like you're saying, if you're going to get Chinese takeout, we've been in some spaces, usually it's other countries where the takeout system is that people bring their own bowls from home. And there was one country we were in, they brought a huge mixing bowl. And she said, "Oh, the bigger container we bring, the more we get." And it was like, the restaurant just serves. And of course, in the U.S., for all kinds of reasons, we just can't show up with our own vessels to take home this dinner, right? But in theory, it would be cool if we could, because again, the restaurants aren't they're not equipped to do that, And if they're going to do something like bamboo containers or others, it's it's expensive. It gets really pricey when you look at non-plastics on that. And then there's a lot of other barriers, just thinking from like the restaurant perspective and all. So but I think those things that we think of taking a step further, well, don't heat it in there, but it's like just even bringing it into your house, that sloughing can happen from that. The ability to see a greater depth of the levels of plastics. There was an article in the Journal of Nature Medicine that showed a 50% increase in plastics in our brains that was in about an 8-year span between 2016 and 2024. Does that stat mean that or I guess, do we really have 50% more plastics than we did, 8 or 9 years ago? Or is it that we can detect more than we did before?
With that study, because they were using the same methods, it is definitely we're seeing more in us, and in many ways it's kind of like, well, that's not actually all too surprising, right? As we produce more plastic, we are going to have more plastic in the environment. We are going to have, and we are part of the environment. We don't think of it that way because of our skin, and it's like, oh no, the environment's out there. No. We are the environment, right? So if it's out there, it's in here. Right? There's not actually a separation there. It just feels like it. And so that was actually, we're seeing more within our bodies.
So we can't get around that. It's not just that we're detecting it better. There's more.
There's actually more. Yeah.
That 5 bottle caps of plastic in our brain. What's your take on that? The findings on that?
It's so, I have to say, when the study came out, I was just like, I called it. Probably 10 years ago, I hypothesized, when I give, public presentations, I was talking about how, and trying to raise awareness about plastics on my own campus, I went running around my campus in a bagman costume and trying to get people to use less plastic bags, right? It was great fun, but it was also incredibly hot. And I was like, I had never really thought about it, but I was like, oh yeah, plastic is an insulator, right? You wrap wires in plastic to keep the electricity on the wire and not, so you don't zap yourself, right? And all of a sudden I was like, well, what if plastic is in our brain, and our brains are basically like wires, right? It's electrical connections. That's how we transmit information. This is going to cause all sorts of neurological disorders. I said this in front of an audience. There's probably a video out there about it. I was just like, I think we're going to find at some point in the future that there is a connection between the increases we're seeing in dementia, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's with a fact that plastics are getting into our brain and they're disrupting those electrical signals. And that is what is actually coming to fruition now. Like, that data is starting to come out. So you don't just have that study in the Journal of Nature Medicine. There have been additional studies that are connecting plastics with these neurological diseases.
What are some of the other risk and I guess outcomes that we're seeing? You mentioned, like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, with that accumulation in our brains. What about things like cardiovascular risk with plastic?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's in, the first, before, so 2 years maybe before we found it in our brains, somebody was, put out a study where they found it in our blood, and which just led you to go, okay, if it's in our blood, it's gonna, so right. That's kind of what I think the precursor to looking in the brain. But and so what we're finding with regard to its presence in our blood is that it is associated with increases in strokes and other cardiovascular diseases. And if you think about it, you've got a little piece of plastic flowing with your blood. Well, it provides a surface for plaque to build up, right? It's like a seed, and everything kind of it starts to glom onto it. And so then that causes a blockage of the artery. And so you're seeing increases in plaque buildup and strokes and other cardiovascular diseases because of the presence of microplastics within our blood. Gastrointestinal tract, as somebody who's really into fitness and health, there's various gastrointestinal diseases that are being associated with the presence of plastics within our gastrointestinal tract. So particles that are smaller than 100 microns, so again, the width of a human hair, those will move across the gastrointestinal tract and they'll end up in our blood. But for larger particles, they won't. And so they'll just stay within your gastrointestinal tract. And so they've looked in human feces and we're pooping these out. In addition, babies, they've looked in baby poop. They're also pooping them out. So, so as that plastic is in your gastrointestinal tract, it can lead to various gastrointestinal diseases, like, irritable bowel movement and others. Yeah.
Pooping it out would be the best thing that can happen.
That would be better than
the accumulation
of blood in your brain and moving across the placental boundary, because it's been found on both the maternal and the fetal side. And so we know that it's making its way into the most vulnerable of our population before they're even born.
That was going to be my next question is, types of hormone disruptors and the impacts on fertility. What's kind of the summary on that, again, without completely scaring people, because it's also, we'll start with that question.
Yeah, I can end with some good news on that front. So there's a great book, if any of your audience wants to learn more. It's called Countdown by Dr. Shauna Swan. You have to put in her name when you Google it, because there's a lot of books called Countdown, I discovered. But Countdown by Dr. Shauna Swan, it's an incredible book, and it talks about this specific chapter 7 is all about plastics, but it's how these endocrine disrupting chemicals are affecting our ability to procreate. And it's happening on both the male and the female side. So, and then sperm count is going down, sperm mobility is going down. So they're not swimming as good. For women, basically, it comes down to the nice way of, or the easiest kind of most approachable way of saying it is that our eggs are older than they should be. So, a 30-year-old, the eggs are typically more like you're 50, which makes it less, the probability that you're going to get pregnant and carry it full term is reduced the older your eggs are. And so it's not just that you're hearing more about people having trouble getting pregnant. People are actually having a harder time getting pregnant. And you're not just hearing more about miscarriages. People are having miscarriages. I said we could end this segment on a really positive. Dr. Shauna Swan has been carrying out some interventions with couples and finding that if she puts them on a plastic detox diet, basically reduce the presence of plastic within their lives, that within 3 months, she's seeing changes in their ability to conceive.
Wow.
So it really kind of shows you that we have more control over this all than we think we do.
And that definitely could be moved in the short term, that it's not, maybe doesn't have to take an entire lifetime, because it can feel that way. It can feel like, wow, how much effort do we need to make to even nudge it a little bit? So that's promising to hear. When we talk about a plastic detox, what are the ways that plastic is entering our body? Because it's not just, we think about what we're eating and drinking, and those are probably 2 really big ways, but it's not just that.
Right. We inhale it is a big one. Actually, at the current time, we are inhaling, to the best of our knowledge, we are inhaling as much microplastic as we are getting through our food and water.
Wow.
So, yeah. I mean, to think about it, I'm sitting here on a synthetic carpet, right? And every time I come to work and I walk on this, little microfibers are going into the air and I'm breathing them in.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you're walking through the world with these like nanoplastic goggles, and it's like everything's illuminating to you as you walk through. You're like, synthetic fibers, like it's in your chair, it's in your shirt, it's in the workout clothes.
Yeah, it's there some like sci-fi movie where you're wearing goggles and you see things, evil
It's
is
like
coming.
infrared, and you've got that for plastics. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're breathing it in and we're eating it. If it's packaged in plastic, it has plastic in it, just period. It's kind of scary is, that there've been studies, they're actually finding that microplastics can go from the soil and actually go into plants through the root system. And if they're in plants, well, if you're vegetarian, you eat plants. And
Right.
if you're a carnivore, you eat animals that eat plants.
Right.
So it's in, everything. Um, and, it's in our water and, anything that we're drinking as well. So
And then also skin absorption.
mostly on the chemicals as opposed to the plastics itself. But you can definitely absorb chemicals across your skin. So, like, I'm one of those people. I try and refuse receipts anytime they want to hand me a receipt. I'm like, no, that's okay, thanks. And people don't realize that the receipts that because most of them are heat receipts now, so it's a heat process. It's not typing. There's a chemical on there, and so it's actually one of the PFAS chemicals. So when you hold a receipt, it's just the 10 seconds it can take you to crumple that receipt and throw it away. Chemicals have absorbed across your skin and ended up in your blood. Yeah, fascinating study out of University of Washington, St. Louis, Washington. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. All right. So mostly with the nanoplastics, microplastics, it's when where we're eating, drinking, where we're inhaling. The things that we don't even think about around us. You mentioned like the carpet that had synthetic fibers in it. Last time you and I were talking, we talked about clothing and apparel. And, we did a glass blowing class recently. My good friend and I both turned 50 within a couple of months. And so we've kind of a year-long celebration. And one of the things we were doing was a glass blowing class. And the instructions are to wear no synthetic fibers because of, I guess, catching on fire. And the reality is, in a class, they're really kind of doing it all. You stand there and you feel like you're blowing some glass, but they're really the ones doing it. It's to wear 100% cotton. And so the shirt I'm actually wearing for our interview right now is one that is 100% cotton, because I realized as I was looking for that, most that I have are a blend. They feel like cotton. I think they're 100%, but they're not. They are a blend of the synthetic fibers. We actually kind of fudged that day, and we did wear a shirt with synthetic fibers because it also had 1975. The year that you were born. We're like, well, there's the cute factor, or it could catch on fire, but we're going to wear 1975 shirts. But but I actually did bring 100% cotton as a backup. If they said, no, you must wear it. But I realized how few items we have. At least I'll speak for myself, because a lot of what I have can do multi-purpose. It can be something that you would wear out in a social setting, but you might also, it's an athletic wear that you could use. And so much of our athletic wear does have that. We have a local brand here, Task, that's bamboo. And
Cool.
it's really neat, TASC. But so much of it does have the synthetic fibers. And so the inhalation of it, the ingestion of it, the places that we don't expect to have it. What are some of the other things, I guess, to just kind of bring someone to an awareness of, if someone says, you know what, I don't drink out of plastic bottles, I don't do plastic food containers, I use all glass containers, glass jars for my liquids. What are some of the other things that we might not even be thinking of? They're really common culprits. And then we can look at some of the solutions of what to do instead.
That's a very good question. So, I mean, bottled water is number one, but you already brought that up. So, before we started, you were talking about that wire cutter challenge and dusting, and that's a great place to think of, right? So, because our clothes are largely synthetic, because our carpets are synthetic, our furniture, like couches and chairs, they all have synthetic. So it ends up in the air a lot and it's going to settle as dust. So, finding regularly dusting and using, just water, dust cloth and throwing that out is a great way. Also, I think to decrease. Personally, I've made it into a game where as I'm running out of a product, I think of, well, how can I replace this with something that doesn't have plastic? So like chapstick, I found chapstick that comes in little cardboard tubes. So that, just getting through winter, I use a lot of chapstick. So, it's, and I do that with my deodorant now, is basically like a lotion that I put on that comes in cardboard. I brush my teeth with, it's powder. It's called tooth powder instead of toothpaste, and it also comes in cardboard. My laundry soap is in aluminum. Both my laundry soap and my dish soap is in aluminum that I can recycle. My shampoo, conditioner, and other personal care products like that, I get that comes in aluminum that can be refilled and returned. And so I've made it into a game as I'm like going through and I'm about to run out of a product. I'm like, okay, let's take some time and think about how can I replace this product with something that is plastic free.
You have on your website some links to some of your favorite products too. So we'll link to your website, but can you say it for our listeners?
Yeah, sherrimason.com.
And it's SHERRIMASON.com. Yeah. And so check it out because she has specific products, links to that of some of those that she went through really quickly. I have I found a woman who she makes chapstick and I love it. I love the quality of it, but I just got a notice from her that she went from making chapstick in Colorado. I met her at a market there and she's joining the Marines. So she's no longer making the chapstick. I thought, I know. And what a very interesting shift in her life. So I'll get the name of that one from you too, because it's finding those products that are packaged in a way that, doesn't contain plastic, yet also is a quality product. It's effective. It has all the other properties that we're looking for in that. What Sam mentioned is the wire cutter challenge. I'll link to that too in our notes. It just so happened that as I was preparing for this interview with Sam, I saw wire cutter it was a 3-part or 3-week long plastic reduction challenge. And as she and I are recording this episode, it's only week 2, but some of the things they talked about, of course, is cutting back on drinking beverages that come in plastic, using stainless steel or glass instead, avoiding using plastics for cooking or eating or food storage. But that third one that she brought up was regularly managing dust. I was like, oh, wow, because it is one of those things that we don't think about of dust containing things like plastics. The other that they mentioned in one of their, the first newsletter they had on it was laundry. I thought this was interesting. And so that's something that I hadn't really thought about, but it was use cold water when possible. And why? Is that because hot water is going to cause more of that breakdown of the plastics in our fabrics?
Yeah, it causes it to break more. The heat causes plastics to become more brittle, and so they'll break more easily. And so you get that fragmentation of those microfibers off.
The second was line dry your clothes when possible. Do you line dry?
Yeah. I don't. It's funny that you asked that. I was talking to one of my environmental heroes and she's like, okay, what's your cheat? And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, we all have something that we know we shouldn't do. And I was like, oh, I totally love a good hot dryer. I hate things that are line dry. They're all stiff and stuff. My husband loves it, and I'm just like, no. Well, I need.
You're right.
I do. Yeah.
Some of our neighbors across the street, we actually co-parent a little duck together, and it's the cutest thing. And they line dry their clothes. And so also whenever the duck has the duckling babies, I'm in the backyard and sometimes the clothes are all there and I'm running through all their clotheslines. And I'm like, you see a picture of yourself outside of yourself. And I'm like, all right, if anybody else saw this right now, but they line dry. I think for a variety of reasons, but they it's just second nature to them. And then
Yeah.
the last thing that was on the laundry part is simply washing it less often. There's some things that we have to wash all the time, but others you can kind of get by with a little bit less. And then there might be some too that letting it air dry or line or quote line dry, but even just like letting it dry flat. I found that I started to do that with certain things, even to just not, and I guess I never even thought about it in the plastics, but things that I feel like if I dry it so much, it's going to ruin the quality of that apparel quicker because it's breaking down those fibers in it. So I may dry it a little bit and then let it lie flat for the rest or vice versa. So I'm only drying it halfway.
There's a lot of synthetics but I had to remind my husband about this because he bikes a ton. And so all of his biking gear, I'm like, dude, you can't put that in the dryer. You need to like let that just line dry, basically.
Right.
So yeah, that's true.
So the laundry shifts, the dusting, the refill, reuse that you talked about with like, all the different types of products. Look for cardboard instead of plastic when we can. Look for things. I'm going to check out that toothpaste too. Growing up, my dad always used baking soda to brush his teeth. And that's kind of what I feel like it's, he'd wet the toothbrush and stick it in the baking soda and.
Yep. It's baking soda with some mint, so that it doesn't taste as bad as just brushing with pure baking soda, but it's probably very similar to that. I could probably make it myself, except like that just seems like work. So I have to say I found them on Etsy. So I think that, another thing to do is, and then one of the things that I like about them is that they're fairly close to me. I mean, they do ship it to me, but it's fairly local. It's in Central PA and I live in Northwest PA. So, if you can find like local, this is a woman-owned business, and support and go local. I support that over, like finding, the tooth powder that I found that it started with, that's how I found everything else that they manufacture. Their name is Bare Essentials, by the way, but it started with the tooth powder because I'd been using the toothpaste tablets. And I discovered that my toothpaste tablets that I was purchasing were coming from Indonesia. And I was like, ooh, that's a really big carbon footprint. And just so that I could get my tablets. And so I was like, I need to find something more local. And I ended up coming upon them on Etsy, just, Googling day after day, looking for like different options. So when I found them on Etsy and I really liked their products. And so I've gone to them for other products as well.
You're right.
Yeah.
The woman that I mentioned with the chapsticks that I found, I met her at a market there and she was, local to Colorado. But when I would purchase them, I would do basically a year's worth at a time, and have her send that. So as we start to think about our own intake, and how would you recommend that someone almost takes an inventory of our plastics? Almost like how do we decide or how do we determine where our baseline is and where and if or how much of an improvement we're making as we start to dial back?
I mean, there's a book that I really like called Plastics, A Toxic Love Story. It's another book. I swear I don't just read plastics books, but those are my two favorite, the ones that I've named on
That's
this
a
podcast.
great name too. Plastics, A Toxic Love Story. That's a really good name.
Yeah. It's fantastic. It's a really fun read too. I have to say, like, I couldn't put it down, and believe it or not, I don't actually always read about plastics. So that actually says something. I'm more into murder mysteries when I read. But so she starts her book. She, in her like little intro there, she was like, okay, so I had this idea that I was going to go plastic free. And then I was sitting on a toilet and realized that I already failed.
That's so true.
It is so true. I just laughed. So she decided instead that she would just, during the day, she would write down everything that she used that was plastic. And she's like, starting with the pen that I was using to take the lists.
Wow.
And so you could definitely do that and just spend one day and just kind of try and jot down where you can. And it really makes you aware of how much, like, I don't think many people think of their cars as being plastic, but your cars are a lot of plastic. Your refrigerator is a lot of plastic. Now you're not going to get around that,
right? So
like, I
maybe
mean,
for
if you're trying,
someone, it could be like, because I'm thinking, gosh, you could do, if you were going to jot down everything plastic for a day, you possibly could do nothing else for that entire day except writing down what you're touching or consuming,
oh, computer, mouse,
everything. So then it would
telephone.
be, what am I touching or using or consuming most often?
Yeah.
And would you start with things that are touching things we consume, or would it be all?
Packaging is the number one. I mean, if you look at how plastic is used, globally, packaging is like 40% of the market. And so, that's really where I start, is thinking about, the things that you're consuming and finding ways that you can reduce that. I mean, there are things that you can't, right? And so this is where we get into policy discussion, right? And like I always say that, like, I love cheese and I can't buy cheese that's not wrapped in plastic. So, I either don't eat cheese, which is not an option, or or I end up having some plastic in my life. There are other things though, like I won't buy yogurt that's in plastic. It has to be in glass, and preferably from my local yogurt maker.
Right.
Because I know it's packaged hot in plastic, and that's just a no-go for me. Like, I just won't do that. So, finding those places where you can logically make changes, I think is good.
And for the person who says, "Oh, I have yogurt every single day, it's a single carton every single day," then finding that alternative could make a difference there. I know we have just a couple of minutes left. Do you think there's a couple of things that could be a little bit of myth busting, or is there some policy that might be on the horizon to talk with us about? How do you want us to wrap up? It's up to you. It's a lot of pressure.
I mean, I think the biggest policy thing that needs to happen on the national stage is the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act that includes extended corporate responsibilities. And it's a way of using the market to get an outcome that we want. So if we want less packaged plastic, then it's basically charging companies who manufacture plastic, charging them more for using plastics that can't be recycled, like polystyrene or polyvinyl chloride, charging them less for things that can actually be recycled, like polyethylene terephthalate. But if they switch away from using plastics at all, they don't pay anything, right? And that money goes into the recycling infrastructure, and takes that burden off of the taxpayer, which is one of the reasons why it's perpetually underfunded. So that's the big policy change that needs to happen.
Where are we as far as where that is? And that's the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act?
Yeah. So it was introduced a couple times into Congress. I think it had some support, but the current administration, it's not going to go anywhere in the next, few years. We'll see what happens at midterms. But I would say under their current federal administration, that's probably not going to move anywhere. So I think what is happening is that you have states taking up the mantle in some regards. So more kind of interest in bag bans and single-use plastics. There are areas. I don't know if NOLA, I know that Galveston was looking at doing a reusable foodware program where you get your takeout in reusable containers that you can drop off. They get washed and returned. This works for like coffee cups and all sorts of things. So I think there's some really kind of innovative shifts that can happen that allow us to have the convenience, but without so much plastic. So I think those things are kind of on the horizon.
So until there's the potential for policy change, which really is essential to position us in a better spot as consumers. But until that point, the things that we can do on our own are taking stock, looking around us, having that awareness, starting to look and see, what am I consuming? What am I touching? What am I using often that contains plastic? Is there another option for it? And like you said, it's taking the time, and it's not like every time you're purchasing it, you've got to go back to the drawing board and research it. You do it once and, there's another option for that. And I like the idea, like you said, of like the aluminum type containers, because I mentioned to you before we started recording, I'm a spiller. And so going around with a glass bottle, I've had so many that they're so cute. They're so streamlined. They're cute. They're efficient. They're reusable. Everything. And I'm picking up the glass shards in my driveway. It's happened at least half a dozen times. My driveway, other people's driveways, and so, but aluminum is like it kind of solves that. So same thing in our shower. The idea of glass containers, I'm immediately like I can't, but for that reason. But aluminum is. Well, that's an easy solution, So I think I appreciate the encouragement for all of us to start thinking through how we can do things a little bit differently. The last one I'm going to ask you is about straws, because I know that's a really big thing. And I think a lot of people think about straws as far as how it affects the environment. But now when you think about the sloughing of the nanoplastics, it isn't just about, okay, I'm going to, if you have a straw, but you're using it yourself multiple times, and so you're not having as much waste. It's not just about the waste that is creating for the environment. It's about it for yourself. But plastic straws are just really, they're not as easy. So then there's metal straws. What do you use for that?
I do. I have metal straws that I carry actually in a number of my purse, my backpack. I have one that folds up that, you can clip to all sorts of things. I'm not a big straw person though. I mean, and I do understand that there are people who, for various kind of physical ailments need to use a straw. And the metal straws don't always work for them. But there's been some creative, I think a lot of us are not huge fans of the paper straws because they tend to disintegrate after a little while. But I've seen places that have used like pasta, which was kind of fun, So I think that there's, kind of clever bamboo straws or another one. So I think that there's some clever straw ideas out there. If it's something that you're interested in.
All right. Well, there's so much more that we could go, but for the sake of time, I know that we'll wrap it. I'm going to link to your website, sherrimason.com. I love the products. I love the inspiration, and I'm already thinking through like doing that own personal inventory, that there are so many things that I can start to make that shift, And I think that goes for probably so many of us, that we do things on autopilot, and it's just like nutrition, it's no different than reading that label. What's high in added sugars? It has these other things. And hey, what's my alternative that I can do? It's really the same approach, and starting to kind of lay down new habits and just wire our brains a little bit differently to think, do that little bit of research. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. It's just like looking at a nutrition label, y'all. And what are my other options? It's just, it's getting out of our usual habit, taking that extra minute. So I really appreciate it, Sam.
Oh, I love what you just said. But thank you for having me on the show. I love to talk about this stuff and get the information out to everybody. So thank you.
As more research happens, hopefully we'll have you back on. A tremendous thank you to Dr. Sam Mason for joining us. I truly could have talked with her for hours and hours and hours on this topic. It's one of those things that once you start kind of peeling back those layers, we realize, wow, there's things that we knew that maybe were kind of the obvious. And then when we start going like deeper and deeper in it, there's just so many opportunities that we have that we can find alternatives to really start to shift our habits and shift our patterns as it relates to how we use and how we're consuming things packaged in plastics. It can be an overwhelming conversation. And so I think just really starting, it's just like we're saying with nutrition. So assessing where you are, it's, if someone is eating fast food every single day, or, ultra processed foods, everything's coming out of a package and it's just, a complete mess. it's not realistic that you're going to start going to the farmer's market every day, So what changes can be these big sweeping changes we can do right away? So the way that, my brain kind of thinks about it is nutritionally, okay, sugar sweetened drinks. How can we clear out maybe, sugar sweetened soft drinks or sugar laden coffee drinks or whatever it is? What is that big change that's going to really be the most impactful, the most bang for our buck? And so starting to look at the things that you're consuming or the things that you're using, and what are some of those things for you as well. And so I think Sam had some really good ideas that I'm going to start incorporating on products and how we're purchasing it and how these things are packaged. The other thing I mentioned, that Wirecutter has a 3-part challenge, and some of the content that they have on assessing our plastics consumption and use, and some of the steps to make these changes. One of the things that they kind of boiled it down to is it can feel really overwhelming. And so kind of, again, looking at the big picture, what are some of those big sweeping changes that you can do that are going to give you the biggest bang for the buck? And then really it comes down to being mindful. So Sam talked about every time she's purchasing a product or replenishing something that she's about to run out of, she gives it that extra little bit of time to research and see what other items are out there. And so it's slowing down. It is not just pressing order or picking up from the shelf that same thing that we always do. Take a little bit more time, slow down, explore what our other options are. So shopping slowly is one way to think about it. And this was kind of within the Wirecutter article. I really liked it. They said, try to shop slowly and buy less. So when we can we dial back just our consumption in general and being a little bit more mindful, slowing down and not just going to autopilot to press go, to press purchase, or grab that usual off the shelf. And so using that intentionality when we're purchasing, and what they talk about is, it sort of accomplishes 3 things. Not only are you going to shrink your plastic footprint, you're going to start to lower your exposure to plastics, and you'll start to reduce your carbon footprint as well. I thought that Sam's comment too about, well, she was buying something that was maybe packaged in cardboard. It was a better alternative than what was in plastic, but gosh, it was being shipped to her from Indonesia. So really kind of looking at things as far as the big picture there. And then also not having a strive for perfection, because sometimes when we start to think of every single thing, it can feel so overwhelming. It's like, why even try? Why would, it's, what's the use? Because there's so much that I'm doing that's centered on plastics. Where do I even start? Look at it in terms of progress and not perfection. And I keep saying this, but looking at it as an extension of how we approach nutrition. We don't expect our nutrition intake to be perfect, and our plastics is also not. But what are some of those things that we can do right now that are going to make that biggest sweeping change? So as you start to incorporate some of these strategies into your own life, reach out to me, let me know, either email me or you post it on social, tag me, Molly Kimball RD. I always want to hear about it. I'm always learning so much from y'all. So reach out to me. I'm registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. And if you'd like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next time for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.